I arrived at Citadel Prime expecting another diplomatic session. Instead, I walked into the most tense gathering in galactic history. The colossal council chamber, built beneath a dome of artificial stars, was filled with representatives from dozens of civilizations, yet no one spoke above a whisper. At the center of the room, a massive hologram displayed the shattered remains of the flagship belonging to Nova Kane, the greatest warrior the galaxy had ever known. Intelligence officers confirmed that no escape pods had launched and no survivors had been found. If she was truly dead, every major empire would blame its rivals, and centuries of fragile peace would collapse overnight. Fleet movements were already spreading across the galaxy like wildfire as ancient powers armed for war. From my modest seat representing the Terran Federation, I watched the fear grow. Humanity was considered too young to matter, so no one looked my way. That suited me just fine. Sometimes the people who were ignored saw the most. The silence inside the chamber did not last. One by one, military advisors hurried toward the central platform, carrying fresh reports from every corner of known space. Each update was worse than the last. Border fleets had abandoned routine patrols and formed battle groups. Shipyards were working without pause. Reserve forces that had not been activated in generations were receiving mobilization orders. Entire civilizations were preparing for war before anyone had discovered what had truly happened to Nova Kane. Fear had become faster than truth. A new hologram replaced the image of the shattered flagship. Thousands of glowing markers spread across the galactic map, each representing an active fleet. The display grew denser every second until whole regions disappeared beneath waves of crimson symbols. The Council's Chief Intelligence Director lowered his head before speaking. Our latest projections indicate an 89% probability of total interstellar war within 12 standard days. No one questioned the calculation. One delegate quietly whispered a prayer. Another immediately contacted the homeworld of his empire. Several military representatives simply stared at the expanding sea of red lights, already calculating casualties that had not yet occurred. If Nova Kane was assassinated, the director continued, her empire will demand vengeance. Their rivals will assume they are the intended targets and launch preemptive strikes. Once the first weapons are fired, every alliance will be forced to choose a side. The room became impossibly still. I remained seated behind the emblem of the Terran Federation, observing rather than speaking. Humanity occupied one of the smallest diplomatic sections in the chamber, a reminder that we were still viewed as newcomers among civilizations thousands of years older. Most delegates had forgotten I was even present. Their attention remained fixed on the ancient powers whose decisions could determine the fate of the galaxy. I preferred it that way. People revealed far more when they believed no one important was listening. And while the council debated how to survive the coming storm, I could not ignore a single question repeating in my mind. What if Nova Kane had never died at all? The arguments began almost immediately. Ancient rivals who had tolerated one another for centuries suddenly traded accusations across the chamber. Every delegate seemed convinced that someone else had engineered Nova Kane's disappearance to gain a strategic advantage. Old grudges resurfaced with astonishing speed, each supported by fragments of history, forgotten treaties, and ancient betrayals that stretched back thousands of years. Fear was turning suspicion into certainty, and certainty into preparation for war. The Dominion has crossed 3 neutral sectors, one officer announced. The sovereign clans have armed their planetary defenses. The Alliance has recalled every exploration fleet. Each report tightened the atmosphere inside the council hall until it felt difficult to breathe. Massive tactical projections hovered above us, constantly updating as more military formations entered hyperspace. No one spoke about diplomacy anymore. They spoke only of response times, defensive lines, supply routes, and casualty estimates. The assumption that war was inevitable had quietly replaced every hope that it could still be prevented. I remained silent. That silence was easy to maintain because almost nobody paid attention to the human delegation. We occupied a modest section near the outer edge of the chamber. far from the influential empires that had shaped galactic history long before humanity reached the stars. Several delegates looked directly through me while addressing the room, as though my presence carried no political weight at all. They were not trying to insult me. They simply believed humanity had nothing meaningful to contribute. I watched the holographic map instead of the speakers. Fleet icons continued multiplying until the major trade routes resembled rivers of warships flowing toward uncertain destinations. Every new movement increased the probability that one frightened commander would mistake caution for aggression and open fire. If that happened, billions would die before the Council could even schedule another emergency session. I folded my hands together and listened carefully. Sometimes the smallest detail, ignored by everyone else, became the difference between disaster and survival. I had a feeling that moment was approaching far sooner than anyone in the chamber realized. The debate had reached the point where reason no longer mattered. Every proposal was answered with another accusation. Every attempt at restraint drowned beneath demands for immediate military action. Ancient empires that had survived together for millennia now looked at one another as future enemies. The disappearance of a single warrior had become the spark capable of igniting the largest conflict in recorded history. Then, for the first time since the emergency session began, speaker telephone, Voron turned toward the outer seats. Does any remaining delegation wish to address the Council? His gaze stopped on me. A few delegates finally remembered the Terran Federation was present. Several exchanged amused glances. Others simply looked impatient, convinced that a young civilization could offer nothing useful while the oldest powers struggled to prevent catastrophe. I rose from my seat anyway. My name is Daniel Carter, representative of the Terran Federation. Scattered whispers echoed through the chamber. The human? Why is he standing? Does Earth intend to choose a side already? I waited until the murmurs faded. My government believes the Council is asking the wrong question. That statement earned me dozens of confused expressions. The question is not who killed Nova Kane. A reptilian admiral leaned forward. Then what is the question, human? I met his gaze without raising my voice. The real question is whether Nova Kane is actually dead. The chamber fell silent. For 3 long seconds no one moved. Then laughter spread across the room. Some delegates chuckled politely. Others laughed openly, shaking their heads as if they had just heard an inexperienced cadet interrupt a meeting of admirals. The wreckage has been verified, one counselor said. There were no survivors, added another. You are suggesting our intelligence services are incompetent? I remained perfectly calm. No, I answered. I am suggesting that history has underestimated Nova Kane before. Their laughter slowly faded, replaced by puzzled curiosity. They expected me to defend my claim with military intelligence. Instead, I took a slow breath and prepared to tell them a story that would sound impossible. A story about an ordinary human medic and a wounded alien soldier found only days earlier. I looked across the chamber and allowed the silence to settle before speaking again. Every amused expression remained fixed on me, but I had learned long ago that laughter often disappeared the moment facts entered the conversation. 3 days ago, I began. A Terran medical outpost located on Vega 12 received an emergency distress beacon. It was weak, damaged, and transmitted no identification codes. Our personnel found a single escape capsule drifting beyond the system's outer asteroid belt. The chamber grew quieter. Inside the capsule was a severely wounded alien woman. A council member folded 4 arms across his chest. And you expect us to believe this concerns Nova Kane? I expect nothing, I replied. I am simply presenting the facts. Several delegates exchanged doubtful glances while the intelligence director activated his recorder. Our field medic, Jake Walker, recovered the survivor despite extensive injuries. Her armor had been almost completely destroyed. Her biometric records were corrupted. She carried no military insignia, no command codes, and nothing identifying her allegiance. So your medic treated an unidentified soldier, a senator interrupted. That happens every day. It does, I agreed. Because he never asked who she was. That answer produced visible confusion. He asked only one question. I paused before repeating Jake's words exactly as they had appeared in his medical report. Can you hear me? Good. Stay awake. Safe now. The chamber remained perfectly still. He stabilized her condition, performed emergency surgery, and transferred her into intensive care. According to his report, she regained consciousness briefly before losing it again. She never revealed her identity. One of the admirals laughed quietly. Human compassion is admirable, Ambassador, but what possible connection could this patient have to our crisis? I met his eyes. My government compared the medical scans with classified battlefield records obtained this morning. I touched the control panel before me. A holographic image of a badly damaged suit of black armor appeared above the council floor. It is an exact match. I drew a slow breath. To the combat armor worn exclusively by Nova Kane. For several heartbeats, nobody in the chamber reacted. The hologram hovered above the council floor, rotating slowly as every delegate examined the scarred black armor. Deep fractures crossed the chest plate, while the insignia that had once identified its owner had been deliberately burned away. Even so, the surviving fragments were unmistakable to those who had served beside Nova Kane during past campaigns. Then the shouting began. Impossible! That armor was destroyed with her flagship. This is fabricated human propaganda. Military officers rushed toward the display, comparing the projected image with archived battlefield records. The Council's intelligence director ordered multiple verification scans, while technicians flooded the network with authentication requests. Within minutes, one report after another confirmed the same disturbing conclusion. The armor was genuine. A gray-skinned admiral slammed both fists onto his console. Even if the armor is authentic, that proves nothing. Anyone could have stolen it. I nodded calmly. That is true. His expression briefly softened, convinced I had admitted defeat. But armor can be stolen, I continued. The wounds cannot. With another touch of my console, the hologram changed. Medical scans appeared beside the damaged armor, highlighting fractures, plasma burns, and microscopic traces of experimental toxins embedded throughout the patient's body. Our physicians identified an assassination compound that exists in only one classified military database. Silence returned. It was designed to eliminate enhanced soldiers without leaving recognizable evidence. The intelligence director stared at the scans. I know this toxin. His voice had become almost a whisper. It was developed under Nova Kane's direct authorization nearly 60 years ago. I looked around the chamber. If someone used her own classified weapons against her, then this was not an enemy attack. Several delegates slowly understood the implication before anyone dared to say it aloud. Someone inside her own empire had wanted Nova Kane dead, not because she had lost a battle, because her death would unleash a war powerful enough to reshape the entire galaxy. And somewhere on the forgotten frontier of Vega 12, an ordinary human medic was still protecting the woman everyone else believed had already died. The council chamber no longer resembled the disciplined assembly I had entered that morning. Delegates stood in clusters, arguing over intelligence reports that contradicted everything they had believed only minutes earlier. Officers demanded additional scans while analysts searched decades of classified archives for any indication that Nova Kane had survived the destruction of her flagship. Every new verification strengthened the same impossible conclusion. The armor was authentic, the wounds matched, and the assassination toxin could only have come from someone with access to the highest military secrets. Speaker telephone. Voron struck his staff against the crystal floor until the chamber finally fell silent. Ambassador Carter, he said, his voice noticeably calmer than before, if your evidence is accurate, where is this survivor now? At Outpost Vega 12, a murmur spread through the delegates. A frontier medical station? A civilian facility? You entrusted the most valuable individual in the galaxy to a remote human outpost? I shook my head. No. The chamber became still again. We didn't know who she was. Several representatives stared at me in disbelief. Our medic treated her exactly as he would have treated anyone else. He repaired the injuries, stabilized her condition, and placed her under observation. Her identity was irrelevant. One elderly counselor slowly lowered his datapad. You mean, yes, your people have been protecting Nova Kane for 3 days without realizing it. I nodded once. Field medic Jake Walker never asked which empire she served. He never asked whether she was famous. He never asked what political consequences might follow if she lived. What did he ask? Someone whispered. I remembered the medical report. He asked whether she could still hear him. The chamber remained silent. Then another question came. Has anyone attempted to retrieve her? I looked toward the tactical display. Not yet. Even as I spoke those words, an urgent signal flashed across the central hologram. Priority transmission. Origin. Vega 12. Every delegate turned toward the display. Something told me the quiet days at that little medical outpost had just come to an end. The priority transmission cut through the chamber before anyone could speak. Every holographic display shifted to the same flashing alert. The sender was Outpost Vega 12, and the message carried the highest emergency classification available to civilian stations. Even the military delegates fell silent as Speaker Telephone Voron authorized the transmission. A tired human face appeared above the council floor. Dark circles framed his eyes. His medical uniform was stained with dried blood, and the exhaustion in his expression made it obvious he had not slept in days. My name is Jake Walker, he said calmly. Field medic, Terran Frontier Medical Service. I am reporting a situation that has become considerably more complicated than my original patient intake. Several delegates exchanged confused looks. Jake continued before anyone interrupted him. My patient is stable. Surgery was successful, internal bleeding has stopped, and neurological activity continues to improve. However, approximately 40 minutes ago, unidentified warships entered the Vega 12 system and established a blockade around our station. The tactical display instantly expanded, revealing dozens of heavily armed vessels surrounding the tiny medical outpost. They demanded immediate custody of my patient. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Which fleet? The speaker demanded. Jake glanced toward someone off camera. They identified themselves as elements of the Galactic Alliance Security Command. Half the chamber erupted in protest. Impossible. They have no authorization. Who issued that order? Jake ignored the shouting. I informed their commander that my patient was not medically fit for transport. And? I asked quietly. They gave me 10 minutes to surrender her. Every delegate leaned forward. Jake's expression never changed. So I declined. The chamber froze. You refused? An admiral whispered. I am a doctor, Jake answered. My responsibility is to keep patients alive. Until treatment is complete, nobody removes them from my care. I don't care whether they a farmer, a pirate, or the most famous soldier in the galaxy. Behind him, warning sirens suddenly echoed through the station. Jake looked over his shoulder for only a second. They moving closer. Then he faced the camera again. I believe they preparing to board us. The emergency transmission remained open as the council watched events unfold in real time. Behind Jake Walker, red warning lights flashed through the narrow corridors of Outpost Vega 12 while automated defense systems powered up for the first time since the station had been commissioned. It had never been designed to resist a military assault, only to protect doctors, patients, and civilians from pirates. Yet every bulkhead sealed itself with a heavy metallic thud. Jake never raised his voice. I have informed the Alliance commander that my patient remains under medical protection, he said. She has not fully recovered, and moving her now could prove fatal. A harsh alien voice interrupted through the station speakers. Field medic Jake Walker, this is your final warning. Transfer the survivor immediately. Failure to comply will result in the seizure of your station. Jake pressed the communication panel. They already answered. You are obstructing an authorized operation. I am treating a critically injured patient. You are standing against the Galactic Alliance. Jake's reply was immediate. No, I am standing beside my patient. Silence followed. Even the council chamber seemed unable to breathe. The Alliance commander spoke again, colder than before. Do you understand the consequences of defying this order? I do. And you refuse anyway? Yes. Jake folded his arms. I became a doctor to save lives. If I surrender an injured patient before treatment is complete, then my uniform means nothing. You, have to come inside and remove her yourselves. The transmission captured every second. Outside the station, assault shuttles detached from the Alliance cruisers and began advancing toward the docking ring. Inside the council chamber, delegates shouted for the fleet to stand down, but their orders arrived too late. The boarding craft were already accelerating. Then another voice echoed from somewhere behind Jake. Weak, hoarse, yet strangely commanding. Medic. Jake turned instantly. The woman in the medical bay had opened her eyes. For the first time since arriving at Vega 12, the mysterious survivor was awake. And every person watching the transmission suddenly understood that history was about to change forever. Every eye in the council chamber remained fixed upon the transmission. The woman lying in the medical bed struggled to breathe, yet the instant she opened her eyes the atmosphere changed. Even weakened, there was an unmistakable authority in the way she observed the room around her. Jake Walker stepped beside the bed and gently checked the monitors before speaking. Easy, he said. You, safe. Dawn T tried to move. Her gaze settled on him. Where am I? Terran Frontier Medical Station, Vega 12. The answer seemed to surprise her more than the pain. She remained silent for several seconds, gathering enough strength to speak again. How long? Just over 3 days. She closed her eyes briefly. Then they failed. Jake frowned. Who failed? The people who tried to kill me. Across the galaxy, the council chamber erupted into stunned silence. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even breathed loudly. Jake looked toward the security cameras, unaware that billions were watching. My name is Jake Walker. You, under medical care. Can you tell me your name? The woman hesitated. My name, she whispered, is Nova Kane. Several delegates physically recoiled. Others simply stared at the screen as though reality itself had fractured. The speaker remained frozen, unable to speak. Nova slowly turned toward the nearest window. Beyond the station, assault shuttles continued closing on the docking ring. They found me. Jake followed her gaze. They, demanding custody. Her expression hardened. Dawn T let them. I am trying. No. She forced herself upright despite the pain. You Dawn T understand. Those ships Aaron T here to rescue me. Jake met her eyes. They, here to finish the job. The words echoed through the chamber like a verdict. For the first time since the crisis had begun, every government represented before the Galactic Council understood the terrible truth. The coming war had never been started by an external enemy. It had begun from within. And the first witness to survive the conspiracy was lying inside the smallest human medical station in known space. No one in the council chamber spoke. Nova Kane's confirmation had erased every remaining doubt. The greatest military commander in the galaxy was alive, and the fleet surrounding Vega 12 had not come to rescue her. They had come to silence the only survivor who could expose the conspiracy. The speaker recovered first. Transmit my authority code to every Alliance vessel. Telephone, Voron ordered. All boarding operations are suspended immediately. The communications officer paled. They are refusing to acknowledge the order. A ripple of disbelief swept through the chamber. Impossible. The command codes are valid. They switched to an independent combat network. I watched the tactical display as the assault shuttles continued toward the station without reducing speed. Nova looked at Jake. You still have time. Time for what? To leave. Jake gave a tired smile. I don't abandon patience. They kill you. Maybe. His answer carried neither courage nor fear. It was simply a statement of fact. But if I walk away now, then everything I promised when I became a medic is worthless. Nova studied him for several silent seconds. Commanded fleets of millions, she said quietly. I've seen soldiers charge impossible odds without hesitation. Yet I have never understood people who choose to stand unarmed between violence and a stranger. Jake adjusted the blanket over her shoulder. We don't think about it that way. Then how? We just do the next right thing. Outside, the first boarding shuttle locked onto the station's docking ring. Warning sirens echoed through every corridor. The council watched helplessly as armed figures gathered behind the shuttle doors. Then a new contact appeared on the tactical display. One ship, human, no weapons active, no escort. It emerged from hyperspace without fanfare and transmitted a simple identification signal. Terran Medical Evacuation Vessel, Mercy 7. The boarding shuttles did not slow. But neither did the human ship. It continued on a direct course toward the station, as though the surrounding warships simply did not exist. The lone human vessel advanced without changing course. Its engines maintained the same measured output, its shields remained inactive, and its weapon ports stayed sealed. The tactical display identified it as a civilian medical evacuation ship, a class never intended to enter an active combat zone. Yet it continued toward Vega 12 as though the blockade were nothing more than a navigational inconvenience. Confusion spread through the council. It's stopping. Does the captain understand what is happening? The communications officer interrupted. It has acknowledged every warning. A transmission from the approaching ship filled the chamber. This is Captain Elena Brooks of Terran Medical Evacuation Vessel Mercy 7. We are responding to an emergency request for patient support. Humanitarian protocols are now in effect. We request safe passage. The Alliance flagship answered immediately. Passage denied. Leave the system or be intercepted. Captain Brooks replied in the same calm tone. Request acknowledged. We will continue. Silence followed. Even Nova closed her eyes for a moment. Civilians, she whispered. They have no idea who facing. Jake glanced toward the window. I think they do. Outside, interceptor craft detached from the blockade and accelerated toward Mercy 7. Their targeting systems locked on, but none opened fire. Every commander understood the consequence of destroying an unarmed hospital ship before the entire Galactic Council. The speaker rose to his feet. Hesitating. No, Nova answered quietly. Deciding whether preserving the conspiracy is worth committing a crime every civilization will witness. The distance closed. 10,000 kilometers. 5,000. Then the impossible happened. Instead of turning away, Mercy 7 positioned itself directly between the assault shuttles and Vega 12, placing its unarmed hull across the only approach corridor. No threats, no speeches, no demands, just a hospital ship standing where every warship expected empty space. For the first time since the conspiracy began, the attackers had to choose whether they were willing to fire the first shot at people who carried nothing except medicine. Nobody fired. Across every military network in the galaxy, billions watched the live transmission. A single civilian hospital ship stood motionless before Vega 12, blocking the assault with nothing except international medical law and the certainty that every camera was recording. The Alliance commander hesitated. Nova saw it immediately. He can destroy them, she whispered. Not publicly. An encrypted signal suddenly reached the Council's intelligence director. His console flashed crimson. They've broken their command relay. The chamber fell silent. The boarding fleet acting independently. A cascade of hidden communications appeared above the chamber. Secret orders, altered authorization codes, assassination directives. Every transmission originated from the same source. High Chancellor Varric, the oldest statesman in the Alliance, slowly rose from his seat. His face had become expressionless. You were never supposed to find her. Security officers surrounded him. He did not resist. I warned the Senate that Nova Kane would never allow the emergency powers to become permanent. Peace would have ended everything we built. Delegates stared in disbelief. So you murdered your own commander. I tried. He smiled faintly. But a forgotten human medic changed history. At that exact moment, every assault shuttle received the speaker's restored command codes. One after another, engines powered down. Boarding teams withdrew. The blockade dissolved without a shot being fired. Jake released a slow breath. Nova looked toward him. "You saved more than my life." He shrugged. "I was just doing my job." For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Council stood in unanimous silence as an ordinary human medic received the gratitude of civilizations that had never before noticed humanity. History would later record that the conspiracy ended without a battle. It ended because one doctor refused to surrender a patient. Years later, historians would agree that the Galactic War never truly began. It was stopped inside a forgotten frontier clinic by a medic who refused to surrender an injured stranger. In her memoirs, Nova Kane wrote only one paragraph about Vega 12. "I commanded fleets. I defeated empires. None of those victories restored my faith in the galaxy. A human medic did. Jake Walker never asked my rank, my name, or my species. He saw only a patient. That day I finally understood humanity's greatest strength. They do not protect life because it is important. They protect it because, to them, it is simply the right thing to do." The memorial at Vega 12 bears no statues of admirals or rulers. Only a small plaque. "Every life deserves a chance. History never forgot the man who proved it."